Mae Gyfarnon, Croeso, and welcome back to Cechle Chwedlau, the Grove of Stories. Today on the channel I want to do something quite special that I've been looking forward to for a while, and I want to start a series exploring Tolkienian mythology and some of the mysteries hidden within Middle-earth that are lesser known and more mysterious than perhaps the events we all know associated with The Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit and the like. And to start that off, I wanted to begin by exploring some of the most enigmatic characters that I believe exist within Tolkien's legendarium. And they are the Blue Wizards, known as Alatar and Pallando. Now, if you are a Lord of the Rings fan, doubtless you will know Gandalf and Saruman. And if you've seen The Hobbit and maybe read a little bit more, you'll also know about Radagast the Brown. But you might not have heard of the Blue Wizards. And that is because, although they arrive at the exact same time as the other three, in about the year 1000 of the Third Age, they travel to the east. And they travel with Saruman, interestingly, though Saruman eventually ends up returning. And the Blue Wizards remain in the east and the south. And that is the last, really, that we see or hear of them, save a few notes from Professor Tolkien here and there. A few, as it happens to be, contradictory notes. And they don't have a direct role in the events of the War of the Ring, and therefore they're not really written about. And therefore, it has been, deliberately I suspect, left up to our interpretation to decide and come up for ourselves what has happened to them. To do this, we have to sort of go back to the beginning and understand why these wizards were sent to Middle-earth, and crucially, who sent them. So the year is 1000 of the Third Age, and the Valar, the gods, the pagan-esque pantheon as I see them, that reside in Valinor and who in countless years in the past sang the world into existence, with Eru Ilúvatar, the one chief god above them all. These Valar in Valinor have become increasingly concerned about the re-emerging threat of evil and darkness in Middle-earth, chiefly under the leadership of Sauron, the Dark Lord, and the lieutenant of the first Dark Lord, Morgoth. Now these Valar, they have been forbidden expressly from intervening directly in Middle-earth. But that said, they get permission in the Third Age from Eru to send some of the lesser spirits, the angelic beings known as the Maiar. They get permission to send the Maiar, the servants of the Valar, to Middle-earth, but not in their true, incarnate, powerful form as angels and gods, but in a reduced form, as Istari, as wizards. They get to be sent as emissaries, appearing mortal, suffering the same frailties and pains and fears that mortals fear, but with the gift of immortality, and of course the gift of wisdom and power that is afforded to them as Maya, but in a reduced form, so not as powerful, say, as Sauron is outright and directly. But nonetheless, go they do to Middle-earth, roughly the same time, though not all together, and they sail, so it's thought, to the Grey Havens, where they meet Círdan the shipwright. And there's the 5 of them. And their job here is not to confront Sauron directly and have a big showdown with him. It's to guide and advise and help the free peoples of Middle-earth in achieving their destiny for themselves as Eru intended. But to fully understand, like I say, we have to know who sent the various Maiar. Which gods, which Valar were they associated with? Because this influences their character to a huge extent and their purpose. Now, Saruman, he was sent by Aule. Aule was the smith god, very concerned and engaged with the creation of crafts. In the elder days, it was Aule who built the world out and the mountains as if it were clay. So he's extremely powerful. And likewise, when Aule sends Saruman, Yavanna begs Saruman to take her Maiar. Her Maiar servant is Radagast the Brown. And Radagast is highly concerned with the nature because Yavanna is the goddess of nature and growth. So that's why he goes to Middle-earth. I believe Yavanna was sending him as a foil to Sauron, Saruman, a direct counterbalance. There would be a Maiar, Saruman, who, as Treebeard said, develops a mind of metal. So it makes sense that there would also be a Maiar there who has a mind for all things that grow. So that there would be a bit of equilibrium. Yavanna, while not directly as powerful as Ole, her husband, she was very wise in that regard. So that's why Radagast went. And then there was only one other wizard, Istari, that volunteered. Saruman volunteered, and the other one was Alatar. And Alatar is a Maya of the Valar Orome. And this is fascinating to note because Orome was the god of hunting and roaming and travelling and the wild places of Middle-earth. And with Alatar went Alatar's friend. Alatar asked if he could take a friend because he wanted to take Pallando. So Pallando went with him, and we think Pallando may have been the Valar of, we don't know for certain, but there are some scribbles in Tolkien's notes, either Mandos, the god of death, or Ulmo. And crucially, if he was indeed the Maya of Ulmo, he would have been very concerned with helping the peoples of Middle-earth, as Ulmo did this a great deal, especially in the First Age, even though he was not, strictly speaking, meant to all the time intervene, perhaps as much as he did. And then the fifth and final one to go was Gandalf, who was sent himself by Manwë. Manwë was the king of the Valar, and very crucial that Manwë, being as powerful as he was and as wise as he was, and perhaps closest in vision and understanding to that of Eru Ilúvatar, would choose to send Gandalf, a seemingly less powerful Maiar than the other five. And this also made Saruman a bit jealous of Gandalf, because he saw Gandalf as lesser than him, less powerful, less wise, although he was in fact more wise. And why would he be sent by the king of the gods? I saw it as a bit of a challenge, as a bit of a potential rivalry there. Right from the get-go, there was something a little bit off about Saruman in that regard. So, they arrive in Middle-earth roughly around the same time. They're but not all together as a group of five, 2,000 years before the Lord of the Rings. And off the Blue Wizards go into the far east and south with Saruman. And it could be that the presence of Saruman, even yet in those early days, began to have an initial corrupting effect on the Blue Wizards. We don't know. For Saruman, although he only turned truly evil at the end, was never fully pure of heart and intention. He was always envious of Gandalf, especially since he learned that Gandalf had been given the Ring of Fire, an elven ring of power, by Círdan. Eventually, however, Saruman returned to the west, and the Blue Wizards in the east remained. And there they remained and fell out of the legend and the stories of the Men of the West, and played no further part in the War of the Rings, so far as we know. But with that being said, what do we actually know was written down about the Blue Wizards? Because this changes over time. In letter 211, which was written in about 1956, off the top of my head, and you can read about this in the Unfinished Tales. There is a chapter on the Istari. The verdict by Tolkien is quite pessimistic. He says, and interestingly he says, I suspect, I don't know, but I suspect they failed their mission, like Saruman did, though doubtless in different ways. He speculates that perhaps they became leaders of magic sects or cults or sort of mini warlords in their own right in the far east. So essentially they failed in their mission. It's further implied that Gandalf was the only one who stayed faithful to his mission. But here is where I would crucially disagree with Tolkien's assessment that Gandalf was the only one. And a lot of people online agree with this. And if you do too, let me know in the comments, because ever since The Hobbit came out, there's been a lot of love and appreciation for Radagast the Brown. And people have said it's unfair to say that Radagast failed in his mission because his mission was not the same as Gandalf's. Gandalf was a Maya of Manwë, so he is concerned with the big picture, men of the West, helping them fulfill their destiny. That was his deal. Radagast is associated with Yavanna. His job, for all we know, could have just been to act in some way to restore Middle-earth, help out the natural side of the world, which could be potentially why he never returned to Valinor. Gandalf and Saruman, they may have been on one-way missions to go and confront Sauron, help the Free Peoples. Radagast, on the other hand, may have been sent there on a one-way ticket. He may have gone knowing that his job would then be to stay there, as many Maya spirits and sort of deities were and always lived in Middle-earth. So perhaps Radagast was never fully intended to take on the Dark Lord in the direct way that Gandalf was. Perhaps he was never meant to return. Perhaps, too, were the Blue Wizards also never meant to return, and perhaps that is why they didn't. One of the common themes in Tolkienian writing and mythology is that evil always re-emerges when the watch drops off, when the guard is lowered and the vigilance is no longer maintained as it is in the early days, and you get complacent. That is when evil re-enters the world. And we see this time and time again, from the siege of Angband. We see this with the imprisonment of Melkor in the Year of the Trees. And we see it with Sauron returning time and time again throughout the Second and Third Age, having been defeated, captured in many ways, but always able to come back, whether it be when he's banished from Dol Guldur, whether he's taken prisoner to Númenor, whether it's when he's defeated at the end of the Second Age and then comes back. It's always when the watch drops off. And it's always from the east and the south that he's able to flee and rebuild and come back and continually harass the men of the west. So perhaps the Blue Wizards were also sent on a one-way mission, like Radagast, this is what I would speculate, and knew that they had to remain in the west to maintain that constant vigil forever. And maybe in that regard, they still exist in the world today. What happened then to the Blue Wizards? Did they fail? Did they succeed? Are they still in our world today? Could the Blue Wizards have turned into minor deities in their own right? We know that they travelled a lot, as did, say, the god Odin in Norse mythology. Could one of the Blue Wizards have become Odin? Could they have become sages? Could they have become monks? Could they have been reincarnated into different forms? Think like in Buddhist tradition with the Dalai Lama. Who knows what happened to them? They could have perished and returned to Valinor. They could still walk the world among us now as travellers, seemingly immortal wizards, here and there, guiding, advising, in the shadows, just doing what they can around the world to maintain that ever-present watch and guardianship over the lands of men. Who knows? But what effect do we think they had in the War of the Ring itself, in the final years of the Third Age? Because here, Tolkien changes his tune. Initially, when writing in 1956, he's pessimistic. But by the time he writes Volume 12 of the Histories of Middle-earth, he doesn't write it, but in his manuscripts that are then later published by his son Christopher, in Volume 12, The Peoples of Middle-earth, he speaks a lot more optimistically about them. He says that perhaps they had a great effect in reducing the power of Sauron in the east and south, and had a great effect in, interestingly he says here, both the Second and the Third Age, in reducing his ability to muster a strength in the east and south that would have overwhelmed the men of the West and the free peoples of Middle-earth far, far quicker than he looked like he was going to. And I think this is the most plausible scenario for a number of reasons. Because in the Third Age, when Denethor looks into the Palantir to contest with Sauron and to learn of his strength, he sees a mass of force arrayed in the east. And he says, against the force that has risen in the east, there can be no victory. And later, in the last debate after the Battle of Minas Tirith, Gandalf says that for all Denethor's faults, he was right about that, and he saw the truth of Sauron's plan and his strength. And that in the east, Sauron still, whilst he had been defeated at Minas Tirith and elsewhere in Lothlorien and Mirkwood and Isengard, he still had overwhelming forces and would, through a ongoing war of attrition, eventually conquer Middle-earth by force, no matter how long it took, if he had to. He had that numerical advantage. And Gandalf says this, but again, I would question Gandalf here, because this never materialises so far as we can see. Yes, we know that Sauron had to rush his attack on Middle-earth because he was threatened by seeing Aragorn in the Palantir, thought that perhaps Aragorn had the One Ring and acted swiftly to make sure there could be no challenge to his rule, and therefore attacked a little bit sooner than he would have done. But still, despite this, they didn't have the vast numbers that would have seemingly been able to overrun the Free Peoples of Middle-earth, based on the simple fact that, well, they didn't. They were unable to win through strength of arms at Minas Tirith, despite the city being quite weakly defended. There were 3 attacks on Lorien that were all beaten. There were 1 attack on Isengard, which the Ents beat off. Even Mirkwood and Thranduil's realm in the north of Mirkwood were able to win the battle under the trees. The only place they had some success was the Easterlings were able to win the Battle of Dale against the combined forces of the Northmen of Dale and the Dwarves of Erebor. But even that was a hard-won victory, and it wasn't a crushing victory in the sense that they were then not able to capture Erebor afterwards. And the Dwarves and the Men of Dale were able to take refuge within Erebor, and following the defeat of Sauron, the Dwarves and the Men of Dale sallied forth out of Erebor, broke the host of the Easterlings from Rhûn, who were by this point demoralised following the defeat of Sauron, and drive them out of the north, in that sense. So where was this massive strength in the east then that was supposedly there to overrun Middle-earth? Because they didn't win any battles. They had 1 small success in the north, but then not enough to overrun it completely. And then following the coronation of Aragorn, we know that he joined forces with Éomer, and they went on a campaign in Rhûn and finally subjugated Rhûn once and for all. That was in the east, and in the south, the kingdoms of Harad submitted and capitulated straight away without a fight and surrendered to the reunited kingdom and to Aragorn. So where was this strength? If it wasn't there during the War of the Ring and it wasn't there afterwards, can we put the victory just down to the strength of arms of the men of the West? Or could it be that perhaps they were never as strong as initially feared? And if they weren't as strong as initially feared, why was this? And here, I believe, is where the influence and role of the Blue Wizards was most prominently felt within the events of the War of the Ring. I believe that they went to the east and had a great role as advisors and emissaries to all the various tribes, the Wain Riders, the Men of Karn, the Easterlings, the Balcloth tribesmen, even in Far and South Harad. I believe they would have played a crucial role in sowing dissent against those lords and against the rule of Sauron, undermining the rule of Sauron and his ability to draw military resources from the region by acts such as encouraging rebellion, encouraging refusal, maybe supplying and supporting guerrilla warfare tactics in the region to undermine the unity and cohesion of that area. Perhaps even playing sides off against one another, sowing distrust and discord so that there was infighting rather than cooperation. And it may have been in this that the Blue Wizards were corrupted and did indeed fall to evil eventually, though admittedly after the events of the Lord of the Rings. Gandalf says it's perilous to study too deeply the art of the enemy in case you begin to become the enemy itself. And this he says in warning about Saruman, who studied the ring-making craft of Sauron so deeply that in the end he actually became slightly envious and of Sauron and developed kind of a reluctant admiration for him, seeing him more as a rival rather than someone to be conquered. Perhaps the same thing happened to the Blue Wizards. Perhaps in their politicking, they had to take on a sort of Game of Thrones-esque role, a bit like Varys the Spider or Littlefinger. They had to be reduced to these dirty political tactics, and perhaps that was what corrupted them and drove them to more cult-like mystic figures rather than the emissaries of the Valar that they were initially meant to be. And this would be an interesting middle ground between Tolkien's two opinions of them. The early pessimistic, that they failed and became leaders of magic cults and sects, and the later optimistic interpretation that we get in the Peoples of Middle-earth that states they actually played a huge role in limiting the power of the East and therefore helping the men of the West in that sense. So maybe that's the middle road. Maybe they did help straight away, and maybe in so helping, the methods that they employed were what corrupted them and led to their ultimate downfall. But maybe again, not. Because there's one really, really interesting thing to consider, and that is that Alatar, as we said earlier, chose Pallando to go with him as a friend. And we know, in Tolkienian mythology, how important friendship is. It is the friendship of Frodo and Sam ultimately that gives them the resilience to complete their quest, that takes them as far further than anyone else could have gone. It's the friendship between Legolas and Gimli that builds that bridge and heals that rift between the dwarves and the elves. It's friendship, ultimately, that wins the War of the Ring. Just like Gandalf says, it's not acts of great strength and power that keep the evil at bay. It's the small acts of love, kindness and friendship. And this is a recurring theme across all of Tolkienian mythology. So maybe in having a friend in Pallando with him on his quest, maybe we can speculate he had the most powerful safeguard in place to prevent that corruption. Maybe that's why they had such great success. Maybe that's why they were able to do the things they did without being corrupted and without falling to darkness. The power of friendship. Could that have been what saved them? Could that explain why they never returned to Valinor? It's possible. Why else might they not have returned to Valinor? Again, this goes back to who their Valar was. It was Orome. And if you really know your Middle-earth lore, you'll know that Orome, who travelled furthest in Middle-earth, was the Valar who led the elves on the great journey from Cuiviénen, in the Year of the Trees, all the way across Middle-earth to Valinor on the summoning of the Valar. So it could be that after the events of the War of the Ring, Alatar and Pallando continued to play a role in shepherding the remaining elves in the far east to Valinor, so that they could go and live out their days there as was intended by Eru. Because at that time there would still have been many elves living in the east, as that is where they originally awoke. And many elves did go and leave Middle-earth in the Year of the Trees, but many stayed. Many refused the summons of the Valar in those early years, and this was what's then called the sundering of the elves, because they're split apart. It's interesting to note that it said that of the elves that did stay, all 144 of the first awakening elves, the OG elves, the first generation, they all wanted to stay in Middle-earth. They didn't want to go, and so they did. So there would have been a great many elves still in the far east of Middle-earth that we just don't know about because they don't play a role directly in the west of Middle-earth, in the area that we know through the story of The Lord of the Rings and the Hobbits. But maybe Alatar and Pallando, after this, with the ascendancy of man in the Fourth Age and the diminishing of magic and the role of the elves, maybe they played a crucial role in taking what was left from the east of the elven population and guiding them into the west, so that Círdan the shipwright could sail them off to Valinor. Maybe even this wasn't the first time they'd done that. Maybe Alatar and Pallando had been with Orome back all those years ago, in the years of the trees, during that time. And maybe that's why Tolkien speculates that perhaps the blue wizards played a role in the Second Age of Middle-earth. Because that seems odd when we're told that they didn't go there until the Third Age. How could they have played a role in the Second Age? Unless they knew the land, unless, like Orome, they went back and forth to Middle-earth on missions, side quests, helping out here and there, fighting evil where they could. Not in a huge way, but just in a small way, helping with migrations, helping with summons. So maybe they had been in Middle-earth for a long time. Maybe they'd been here and there to Middle-earth. Maybe they knew of it, and that's why they were able to travel so far south and east, because they had that knowledge, that far-travelling knowledge of Orome and his travels. We don't know, but Tolkien deliberately leaves us the gaps to fill in, and I think that is part of the beauty of The Lord of the Rings, is that Tolkien, rather than being an objective author, takes a step back and he writes it as a history, as a mythologist who is crafting the mythology, but also leaving some of it to be crafted by us, by our imaginations, by our interpretations, by our ongoing discussions, which we have so many of now. So that's what I believe. I believe the Blue Wizards had been to Middle-earth before the Third Age. I believe they stayed in Middle-earth, and I believe they still walk the world among us now. I believe they've probably had many roles. Perhaps now they're political advisors, monks, sages. Perhaps in the past they've been pagan demigods, such as Odin and others that travel far and wide across many cultures. And I optimistically think that they did play a large role in confronting Sauron in the East in ways that perhaps aren't as appreciated as they should be. And I think while ultimately there would have been a huge pull to corruption for the methods they had to resort to in order to achieve these ends, I think ultimately it was perhaps the power of friendship between the two of them that saved them and prevented them from falling to darkness as Saruman did. But what do you think? Do you think I'm being too optimistic, too romantic in my view of the Blue Wizards? I would love to know what you think. Do you agree with any of my interpretations? Have I misread any of the sources of Tolkien? Because I've read a lot, but I'm by no means a top expert, and I know nowadays on the internet everyone has access to these informations and also these books. Go and read Unfinished Tales. Go and read Volume 12, The Peoples of Middle-earth. Go read The Silmarillion. Go watch The Hobbit, where it's referenced and is also, I think, for all its flaws, a great insight into the character of Radagast. That's one of the best bits about the movie. And then let me know in the comments below, am I right, am I wrong? What do you think happened to the Blue Wizards? I've told you what I think. I want to know your opinion. So, thank you for watching. My Gavanen, well met. And if you enjoy this video, please like, subscribe to the channel. Let me know if you like these Tolkien videos, because I love the mythology of Middle-earth and Tolkien mythology, and I would love to explore it more on the channel with you. Until then, Diolch yn fawr, goodbye.